Welcome and thanks for joining us. Our guest today is Heidi Kobilski, the General Manager for Federal Civilian at Microsoft. And we have plenty to be talking about today. There's no shortage of topics here. And so, Heidi, I'll throw it to you, on a cyber-focused question here. Of course, the Cyber EO just came out here, the executive order I'm referring to, and the deadlines, they've been coming and going here. There's no shortage of things for agencies to be paying attention to. How can Microsoft help federal civilian agencies achieve compliance with that EO, and what are the things that they got to watch out for?
Sure, thanks. Thanks for having me today. And this is an important topic, one that we've been in talks with government about for some time. And the good news is that many agencies are already far along the path here. But the first piece of the cyber executive order is what they're asking of us is really as a cloud provider, to provide more sharing of our threat intelligence. And so we have been doing that. The good news is we have a long-standing relationship with federal agencies. And so as a result, we've been at the table discussing how and what is critical to provide. So after exhaustive discussions about it, one of the areas that came up was a need for more advanced audit and logging reporting. And so in response, Microsoft provided our advanced audit and e-discovery capabilities at no charge for 1 year to the federal government, all agencies, so that they can start to take advantage of that information. And it's a continued conversation about what else needs to happen. And then the other piece of that is any Microsoft Enterprise Cloud customer, including any federal agency who is taking advantage of our cloud portfolio, has the advantage of being able to leverage our signal. And that's critical because that signal pulls in data 24/7, 365 days a year about what's happening worldwide. We're tracking over 40 active nation attackers, and we're also watching about 140 threat groups. Last year, we thwarted 30 billion with a B email attacks and 31 billion authentication attacks. And if you're a customer in the Microsoft Cloud, you're taking advantage of that capability. And the thousands of cyber personnel we deploy at our cybersecurity centers who are working 24/7 monitoring and investigating all the attack vectors out there.
So Heidi, when it comes to cyber threat information sharing, what more is there going on that Microsoft can offer to agencies?
The other part of the executive order is asking governments to take the next critical step in hardening their data classification, their multi-factor authentication, and most notably their zero trust architecture. And that's a great area where Microsoft can step in because we're actually helping agencies develop and deploy a zero trust architecture. And I'll give you an example where we recently were involved. So with the Small Business Administration, over the course of the COVID pandemic, they had to disperse almost 500,000 loans to small business owners to keep them afloat. And so that meant that they had to also increase from about 2,500 workers to 20,000 to be able to support the surge. And in order to do that, one of the things they did was they deployed a zero trust architecture with Microsoft's support and some of our products. And in doing so, they were able to take these 20,000 newly onboarded employees and look at certain data. So what was the behavior of the user that comes in? Make sure they're authenticating into the service. What is their geographic location? Does that match and correlate with the data of where they say they're located and where they reside or where their office is? And so they marry all that up, and then they develop a zero trust framework so that way they feel confident when the employee enters the environment that that employee is trusted. And that really enabled them to get those 500,000 some loans deployed out quickly. It was probably one of the best shows of immediate payment that we've seen out of government in a really long time. So very proud of the work the team did there.
Fantastic. And while we're on the subject here, how can Microsoft, again working under the Cyber EO framework here, how can Microsoft help agencies improve threat detection and response in relation to all these deadlines that we're talking about and all these things that agencies have to comply with?
Great question. And so I would say for Microsoft, probably the product area that we've seen the most deployment of is the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint solution. It gets highly rated in the Magic Quadrant, and it's probably one of the best products in the market, best of breed, best of cloud, that enables that endpoint detection and protection. And then beyond the core capabilities of our own Defender for Endpoint are the just huge global ecosystem of partners that our customers can use across the federal space to be able to tighten and harden their environment. And that's unique to Microsoft. We are one of the few cloud providers that leverages a huge ecosystem of partners across the spectrum, because each customer, each agency's journey to have a more secure cyber posture requires different capabilities, and they have to address different holes depending on their environment. So that's been a key trademark, is leveraging our partner community. And then the last piece that I think is unique to us, it's partly around detection, but it's also around compliance. And so compliance and updates to contract and procurement requirements are also a big part of the executive order. And so one of the things we're doing around compliance is ensuring that we have things like zero trust workbooks and CMMC compliance capabilities built into the cloud portal. So any agency can go in and access those workbooks and tools so that they can make sure that they're compliant as they roll out these changes.
Well, Heidi, that was great on the cyber piece here. And moving along to citizen services now, of course, another great piece of things that the cloud really does help enable here. How have you worked with federal organizations to ensure a seamless delivery of important services, especially now with remote work being a real reality for a lot of folks still, and ensuring continuity of operations over the past year and a half?
That's a great question. I think, well, the first thing I would say is that over the last 18 months, it really has been a roller coaster ride, hasn't it? And our customers, yes, there was a period in April of 2020 where I would say we were working 20-hour days, we were working weekends, and we couldn't believe the pace at which the federal government agencies were deploying technology to address the pandemic. I kept asking myself, as a technologist, what would we be doing if we didn't have access to technology? It would be such a different situation in the pandemic. And one thing I'll say is federal agencies and our commercial customers alike are saying that they actually were as, if not more, productive because people could really focus, reduce the commute time, and get more out of their work. Now, I would say the other piece of that for us is during that time when it was very exhausting and everybody was firing on all cylinders to help not only with getting the government to be 100% remote work, especially in the civilian agencies where they could, but also to address the emergency frontline workers. We deployed things like Windows Virtual Desktop, and we deployed things like Microsoft Teams. And really, we were inspired by the government. That's what kept us going. That's what helped us really get a lot done in a short amount of time. So the VA, as you know, has about 9 million enrolled veterans today, and they are dispersed nationally across 170 medical centers, plus another 1,200 sites of care. And before the pandemic, at any one time, they might have had the ability to have about 60,000 workers working remotely, which is still a huge amount of workers, but VA is almost 500,000 workers. And so that's an example where over the course of one weekend, we helped them deploy 400,000 users of Microsoft Teams and Windows Virtual Desktop. And that was critical to their ability to address frontline emergency management so that patients, clinicians, physicians could all collaborate in real time about what was needed. And then we actually, over time, took that one step further, all in a short window. But the next thing that we did was we worked with the physicians across Veterans Affairs to help look at how do you keep an eye on whether beds are available at centers, the level of testing and positive COVID results happening. And then we instituted Azure AI capabilities, machine learning, and some predictive analytics, and then created multiple dashboards for those physicians and those clinicians so they could look across the spectrum of all of those medical centers and help figure out how do we ensure the care of these 9 million enrolled veterans, and also make sure we have bed space available, that they could divert and avert situations, make sure they had enough ventilators available, and so, then they even coupled that, for example, with interactive mapping to look at whether they have beds available or they could divert people to places where there was availability. And so those were the kinds of things that we were able to support that I think are really game-changing and are going to actually take us to the next wave of innovation.
All right, very good. Well, a lot going on with citizen services, and great to hear the supporting role that Microsoft's able to provide for VA and other agencies as well. It's been a challenging year and a half for sure. So great to hear all of that. Moving along to more of a sustainability piece of things. How is Microsoft as a company leveraging this kind of technology that we're talking about here to build a more sustainable future?
This was the beginning of the journey for Microsoft to get carbon neutral by 2030, also and reduce more waste than we produce. And with the Cloud for Sustainability, we're really bringing together a holistic approach to how we really address this urgent need.
Well, Heidi, that's great to hear. And what does the future hold for cloud innovation in the government space? I know we're all asking that question, and I'd love for you to hear, we'd love to hear more about what the future holds for cloud.
Yep. Well, I would say the first thing that happened, obviously, is that we've enabled remote work and remote productivity like never before. And most civilian agencies are leveraging tools like Microsoft Teams as a starting point. And then the next piece of innovation that's happening is really around how do you get things done in a more digital friendly way? And how do you make sure that you're really empowering digital employees? And part of that is making sure you have a strong cyber posture, but the other part of that is, in order to enable the future of modernization and the future of productive work, citizens are going to demand that when things like the pandemic happen and they can get access to money quickly from SBA, that those things continue. And so we're now seeing a shift in the conversations around what's the next phase of that modernization, and it really is around things in the mission. So an example of how this comes to life is a partnership we're working on. It's called Project Convergence, but it's a partnership with Microsoft, Verizon, and Medivis out of the VA Palo Alto Hospital Center in California. They're also using that to train surgeons and then conduct ultrasounds real time with 3D technologies. And that's something that wasn't enabled before. And that's another innovation where we're only at the very forefront of what's going to be possible there. Another area where we're innovating, and this is another result of the pandemic, and this is a commercial example, but we've partnered with FedEx on a project called FedEx Surround, where we're actually doing package tracking, especially for things like the dissemination and disbursement of the vaccine. So you need to make sure at all times that the temperature of the truck or the parcel is actually at the right temperature, so it does advanced data monitoring and tracking exactly where is that package at all times. And let's say, for example, the package is on a flight that gets diverted because of weather. Well, then those folks on the ground can make real-time decisions about what other inventory might be available to get to the place that it needs to go. And the same thing is happening in regard to weather. And so we're working on a number of projects with NOAA and other agencies to look at how do we help these agencies use predictive analytics that are available in AI and machine learning and the dashboarding capabilities we have in our Power Platform to really be able to decide, based on historic weather patterns and the current real-time information of the trajectory of a storm, where to send those resources. So for example, during the big storm we had, Sandy, if you recall several years ago, the emergency management teams, FEMA and other local entities, sent their resources to where they thought the storm was trajected to go. And later we learned through our own predictive analytics that the storm pattern showed that it was actually being diverted in a different area. And so we were able to prove that had these entities leveraged these capabilities, they would have been able to send their resources to the specific location where emergency management was needed. And so I would say predictive analytics is really probably the biggest capability that I would see coming out of the next wave of innovation with the federal government.
All right, well, Heidi, there's a lot going on there. Data analytics, 5G, a lot of things that we're seeing now that are going to have more of a role later on. And so thanks for giving us a preview of what to expect. And thanks again for taking the time to walk us through everything that the cloud and IT are enabling now and will enable in the future. I'd like to thank today's guest, Heidi Kobilski, the General Manager for Federal Civilian at Microsoft. I'm your moderator, Jory Heckman, and you're listening to Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on the Cloud Exchange.